All right, welcome to a special episode of Anti-War News. This is the first interview I've done in almost a year. I look back, the last one I did was with Dr. Feroz Sidwa about his experience in Gaza about 9 months ago. And today I'm very happy to be joined by Matthew Cockerill, who is a historian, a PhD student, and a researcher who's done a lot of great work on the Gaza death toll, really getting into the statistics and the numbers, and an important topic that I think we should get into here. So, Matthew, thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah, I think the first time we spoke, you alerted me to a report from Air Wars that was coming out about the October 2023 Israeli bombing campaign in Gaza, which was particularly brutal. And I saw you've done, again, just kind of digging into the numbers with the health ministry. So we were talking a bit before we started recording, and I mentioned one of the biggest criticisms I get if I get like a new person, say I'll go do some show and someone will start reading my work or listening to my podcast is, oh, you use the Gaza Health Ministry. That's Hamas. The Hamas-controlled Gaza Health Ministry, as all the kind of mainstream media outlets call it. So I think it is important to kind of get into, why I believe the conclusion I came to pretty early on is that their numbers are reliable, and if anything, a undercount.
Indeed.
And I know that's the conclusion you came to as well, and you have a lot more analytical experience and everything. So I want to talk about that. But first thing, could you just tell us about your background, how you got into, because I know you peer reviewed that Air War study, how you kind of got into digging into these numbers?
Right. So I think I bring a lot to the table analytically that maybe others in this space don't, if I can be slightly immodest for a second, simply because the claims that are being made about historically good ratios, historic discrimination, and so forth, I, as a historian, who knows about military history, of course, can actually have a qualitative understanding of what these claims entail, and can compare the percentage of women and children, for example, killed in Gaza to the Syrian civil war or Ukraine, or even the Russian campaigns in Chechnya or the Bosnian genocide and so forth. And so because of my knowledge of military history, and also because of my knowledge of the Arab world, I'm half Egyptian, so I grew up in a household that was bilingual, actually. Mother and grandparents were Arabic speakers, and dad and I were English speakers, I suppose. But and I lived in the region for a few years, so I think my knowledge of the region, the language, and also military history has given me an analytical edge. And in terms of Air Wars, the reason I was brought into that, had the opportunity to help peer review it before they released it, was Mike Spaggett, who is a co-author of mine and is a distinguished world-class academic, economist, Harvard PhD. He's at the Royal Holloway University of London, and he's one of the foremost world experts on casualty counting in war. And he read my analysis of the Israeli claims of a 1-to-1 ratio in Gaza, my debunking of that. He liked the work, and this led to a relationship between me and Mike. So in terms of the Air Wars study, Mike is what brought me into that. And the Air Wars study was utterly shocking. It showed two things in tandem with the Gaza Ministry of Health data. It shows that the number of civilians killed in October 2023 is the highest in a month of bombing for any war, at least that I can find. I've looked exhaustively at this. Worse than Operation Linebacker 2, for example, in Vietnam. Worse, I believe, than any month of the bombing of Cambodia, which killed 50 to 150,000 people between 1969, civilians, and 1969, 1973. I think it's the worst since the Korean War of any month of bombing. So the Air Wars study was shocking to me. And it also gave a lot of insights as to how people are being killed. So about 90% of the women and children that Air Wars found, again, of this historic figure of thousands and thousands of people killed in October 2023 bombing, that 90% of the women and children killed in October 2023 were killed in non-militarized, so there's no military activity taking place, residential areas, like direct airstrikes on residential areas. So this was all to me very shocking, and is one of the reasons that I concluded that this is in fact a major atrocity of this century.
Yeah, I mean, that is a pretty staggering statistic that it was the deadliest month of bombing since the
Hmm.
Korean War. You said that
Yeah.
you could find?
Correct. Yes. Yes. Worse than any month of Vietnam. Like again, the in terms of the largest number of munitions dropped, on a per capita, if you will, basis, the linebacker two, it would be linebacker two in the Vietnam War. But if you look at linebacker two, the number of people killed, even according to the North Vietnamese estimates, and again adjusted for time because linebacker two was 12 days, not a full month, but it's fewer than were killed in Gaza in October 2023. So yeah, it's shocking and remarkable. And
Mhm.
I don't think the Israeli claims. I mean, you guys are, you're founded. We talked about you're founded by Rothbardians. You guys are are very principled, but not exactly in the political mainstream. But I think even the political mainstream, people who don't typically engage in as hard-hitting anti-war discourse as you guys do, I think even the political mainstream is not going to be able to deny that this is an atrocity forever. I mean,
Mhm.
you're seeing in the United Kingdom, for example, elites are moving in the right direction. There was a fellow I was meeting with the other day. I'm not gonna say his name, but he knows David Lammy. He was the Foreign Secretary of Britain. He's kind of he was interested in my work. He's kind of a British foreign policy elite. I'm sure you'd hate his views on the Ukraine war, which I'm much more sympathetic to. Not trying to ruin my vision with your audience, but we have a heartfelt disagreement on that. But anyway, he was very open to the claim that they're killing civilians intentionally. And we're talking.
Mhm.
This is the kind of guy Scott Horton would hate, right? This is a white-shoed foreign policy elite, and he's open to this. So like, it's I think the numbers are so shocking, and how people are being killed in the large majority of cases has nothing to do with human shielding. Like, as I say, in October 2023, women and children were in the overwhelming majority of cases killed not because Hamas is firing rockets out of a residential area and then Israel bombs the people firing the rockets and kills civilians there. No, they just were bombing homes over and over again, where there may have been one militant. There usually wasn't, by the way, or there may have
Mhm.
been one junior militant, but they just killed the whole family over and over again. So I don't think that these atrocities are going to be able to be covered up forever.
Yeah, and I want to get into that, like the "Where's Daddy" thing,
Mhm,
and them bombing them in their homes
mhm.
purposely. But first, you mentioned you did a study, and this is a claim that I hear, and this is
Okay.
a claim that I think is almost too absurd at times to even like have to confront. This
Yeah.
idea that the Gaza is Israeli military operations in Gaza, it's like the lowest
Right.
civilian to combatant casualty rate in the history of urban warfare. And this is pushed by this guy John Spencer,
Yes.
and I see people repeat it, kind of just like regular people.
Mhm.
I haven't seen them say it in a while. It seems like that talking point's kind of gone away a bit. But this was something. I mean, it's so. Could you explain to me why that is so absurd and how how John Spencer tries to justify this
Yeah.
claim?
So Spencer, and one of the reasons, there's many reasons we could talk about, but one of the reasons Spencer is a charlatan in I mean, again, he served in the military. I'm sure he knows a trillion times more about like the tactics. Like he teaches, I think, the tactics of urban warfare than I do as someone who never served the military. But he doesn't know anything about military history. If he did know anything about military history, he wouldn't have repeated the absurd claim that the average, it's a popular myth. Like bureaucrats have repeated this at the UN and the EU, so maybe he got it from them. But if you know military history, this claim he made, which is that the average ratio of civilians to combatants killed in war is 9-1 or 8-1, is an absurdity. Stalingrad and Leningrad, genocidal urban warfare by the Nazis, who were deliberately killing the civilian population. They wanted to raise the cities, starve out the population. They did it on purpose. The ratio of civilians to combatants killed in Leningrad and Stalingrad was far below 9-1, right? Hiroshima, where there was actually obviously just murder, right? Totally indiscriminate, but there was a lot of soldiers stationed there. Hiroshima was not that much higher than 9-1. Probably was a little higher, but not too much higher. So the claim that 9-1 is average is absurd. And Spencer uses this claim that 9-1 is average to try to make Israel look better in comparison. So he claims falsely, which we can get into, Israel has a 1-1 ratio, and this is supposedly sterling compared to the average of 9-1. But it's just a bogus popular myth. Mike Spagat, again, the gentleman I mentioned, the gentleman I mentioned has shown by by posting data from the Uppsala conflict database, which is really the best data we have of all wartime fatalities. I think between 1989 and 2017, they have records for, and the average ratio is about 1-to-1. And in urban warfare, it varies from about 1-to-1 to 2.5-to-1, depending on type. So whether it's a capital or how big the city is, and so on. So it's made up. It shows a lack of. It shows that the guy has not. Netanyahu claims that he always cites Spencer, and he claims Spencer has studied every war. And first of all, nobody has studied every urban. No historian has studied every urban war in history. That's absurd, right? But second of all, it shows he hasn't studied like World War II or Vietnam or Korea, right? These horrible wars where you had all sides in the case of World War II killing civilians deliberately, right? Far below 9-to-1. So it's a popular myth, and he uses that to claim Israel's really great in comparison, and then on top of that, he lies about Israel's ratio of civilians to combatants killed.
Yeah. So just to clarify for people, so this guy John Spencer claims that the average urban warfare, like civilian dead to combatant dead ratio, is 9-to-1, which of course is just a huge ratio. So now that gets into the question, and I know you've also done some work on this, but maybe let's just get into kind of the where's daddy stuff now, because it connects to the October 2023 bombing. I mean, this idea that of a low-level Hamas militant, or I believe even in some cases, and especially since they broke the ceasefire, they do this with civilian officials.
Yes, they've done it with journalists too. I mean, they did it. They did a "Where's Daddy" with. I don't know if you remember the fellow Rifat. I'm looking for his last name. Yes, he's a famous Palestinian poet. I'll look up his last name so I can pronounce it correctly.
So just the Where's Daddy.
Rifat el-Arair, I guess. I don't know his last name. So yeah, he was the specific apartment building, the room where he and his family was bombed, and he was killed. I think he was targeted. I haven't confirmed this yet, but I don't think he was. They thought he was a militant even. I think that they targeted him because of his tweet about. I don't know if you remember this, but he tweeted about. He was ridiculing the atrocity propaganda about October 7th, where they baked a baby in an oven, and he said with powder, I think they Where's Daddied him because of that. So Where's Daddy program, though, is nobody has ever done this in the history of war, where militaries, including the United States, have, if they identify a high-level target, they have bombed the homes of high-level targets and killed a whole family. So I'm not saying we haven't done that, but nobody has ever done that systematically, where for a junior militant, you are systematically killing them by bombing them in their home while they're sleeping. And again, as you say, this extended to civilians too, who are working for Hamas, like a member of the Politburo. That's like the equivalent of a member of a Knesset. Would people accept if a member of the Knesset, even a genocidal one, was bombed to death in his home and killed the whole family with him? So yeah, this is one of the biggest killers in the war, and it also debunks the human shields claim, because there's no sane person could characterize this as a human shield situation, where a guy who's off duty, who fights for Hamas, even in the case that they are targeting militants, is at home with his family sleeping, and you kill everybody in the home. There's no human shield scenario. So for me, Where's Daddy was very important, because it showed me that, well, the kind of their last refuge of Israel, which I was open to, right? Because I hadn't, when you don't know, when you're in the fog of war, you're open to how are all these people dying, right? Their last refuge is this human shields argument, that they're dying because Hamas is embedding among civilians so systematically that whenever Israel kills Hamas guys, it's in the midst of all these people, and they have to kill them this way because there's a firefight going on. They're shooting rockets, right? And the people in the area get killed. No, they're just bombing people to death in their homes, right? Mm-hmm. And the other big killer is these free fire zones. So the Israelis, what they do is they issue evacuation orders, right? So we can talk about that, arguments people give for how that is exonerating to Israel and why I don't buy that at all. But how the Israelis have operated in this war is they issue evacuation orders to a whole city, a whole huge area. And then, if the people don't evacuate, once the IDF comes in, they just shoot everybody they see. And some commanders will not shoot prepubescent children and women, and others do. Like Yehuda Vosh, who's who leads a whole division in Gaza. So we're talking like 10,000 combat soldiers. He has a policy of shooting all women because they could be men in disguise. This is reported in Haaretz in December 2024 by Yaniv Kubovich, right? So the way they operate essentially is anyone they encounter, they do issue evacuation orders, but anyone they encounter after that, they just kill. Basically, if you're in a zone that they tell you to evacuate. So these are the two main ways they're killing people, according to my research. They're killing people through the Where's Daddy program, and they're killing people through these kill zones.
Yeah, and I think it's clear that the Where's Daddy program, like, it's intentional. They're intentionally killing the families. Like, it's not like they're just targeting these guys in their homes so they could kill them. I think it's clear that it's part of the strategy because, one example I could think of, recently Israel bombed a cafe in Gaza City on the beach, which was one of the last refuges for, like, journalists would go there where they could get connected to the internet. And at the time there was children, women inside the cafe, and Israel bombed it. And I forget exactly the number of people who were killed, but I believe it was at least a dozen. And the claim was, there was a Hamas guy there. Mm-hmm. Well, if you knew he was there, like, couldn't you wait till he left and hit him with a drone strike? And
right.
We also saw this. There was a group of women and children, very young children, waiting outside of a medical center run by a U.S. charity, and they were bombed and torn to pieces. And I believe about 10 women and children were killed. And if you look at, there was actually CCTV video that showed there was two guys walking on the street that were directly targeted, and it was almost like they waited for them to get in front of that group of women and children. And there's no evidence that, both from the video of them walking and from the aftermath of their bodies, that they didn't have any weapons on them or anything. So yeah, I think it's pretty clear that they're intentionally killing.
I mean, look at the killing of Anas Al Sharif, right? Just the other day. I mean, I'm actually right now. I'm going to hopefully be publishing this for Action on Armed Violence, a nonprofit I've written for. But Anas, like, I found a video where he, before he's killed, is vilifying Hamas, right? He's ridiculing them. He's saying, your negotiations aren't sincere. And he even says at one point, you should give yourselves up. You should consider giving yourselves up and the hostages up. So yeah, he may have been pro-October 7th at the time. I don't know whether he was or not, right? But he certainly was not a member of Hamas, and they're lying about this and killing civilians intentionally. And with regard to all of these things, whether it's the order of Yehuda Vash, the commander of Division 252, that all women are men in disguise and you can kill them, whether it's the blocking of all food imports for 2.5 months, whether it's Where's Daddy, where you're gonna kill entire families systematically to get, like, targets of trivial or zero, in the case of civilians, military value. All of these, to me, are better interpreted as cover stories for killing civilians than they are the genuine pursuit of a military target. You can always come up with a security rationale, and genocidal regimes have done that historically, right? You can, the most extreme case, I'll be politically incorrect for a moment, the most extreme case is Heinrich Himmler in the Posen speech, where he said, well, we had to kill the Jewish children for security reasons, because they'll grow up to be a security risk just because they'll want revenge on the Germans. So even in the case of the most extreme genocide in human history, the Nazi Holocaust, they had some half-baked security excuse. So the fact that people can characterize this as having a security rationale, to me, is not a compelling argument. You just have to look at the way the arrow is pointed, and also look at stated policy. They want the Palestinians out of Gaza. It's very clear. There is active negotiations with Israeli officials right now in the government of South Sudan to try to take in the Palestinians. Netanyahu in March was quoted by the Times of Israel. I'll get the specific quote. May of 2025, saying, and I'm reading right now, Israel is destroying homes in Gaza so Palestinians have nowhere else to go but outside the strip. So they're destroying infrastructure intentionally, and they engage in genocidal rhetoric recreationally, right? This government does. Mm-hmm. So, it's in terms of the percentage of the population killed, it's in terms of the percentage of those killed are women and children. Worst war of the century, worst since the Rwandan genocide. You have genocidal rhetoric all throughout the government, never punished. There's clear aim of ethnic cleansing. The public appears to have genocidal views. It's all over the television. It just, to me at least, the explanation that they're purposely killing civilians is much more persuasive than, oh, they blocked the food imports because Hamas loots it, systematically, which they don't, right? Or they, then why'd they block the insulin shots from coming in? Like, is Hamas all diabetics, or are they making money off of selling insulin? So no, it's there. I think that these things are purposely killing civilians, and this is not unprecedented in history by at all. Like the siege of these cover stories, the siege of Sarajevo. The tribunal, which dealt with the war criminals in the former Yugoslavia, found that they had these cover stories for killing civilians to intentionally try to provoke a flight. So this wouldn't be some kind of novelty or conspiracy or anything like that. This happens in history. So
I want to hit on something you mentioned. You said, and I've seen you say this before, that when it comes to the percentage of women and children killed, this is the highest you've seen since the Rwandan genocide. I mean, Correct, that seems like a pretty significant fact. And I know recently, so for a long time, it was just over 50% were women and children. And recently we saw a drop in that because of the aid massacres, because of the people getting killed going out to get aid. And obviously it's the men who are going to go do that. But
this points to something very important, Dave, it will actually kind of be an educational opportunity for your viewers, perhaps. So in war, obviously women who are killed are more likely to be civilians than men who are killed, obviously. But if you look at the raw number of civilians killed, men are actually overrepresented. Now, if you're listening to this, re-listen to it if it doesn't make sense, because it does. Those are different claims. You expect a larger raw number of adult male civilians to be killed than children or women, because, as you say, even when they're civilians, even when they're not engaged in combat, men are more likely to run risks, to leave their home seeking aid, as in this case, to be out and about and get caught up in crossfire. So this is one of the reasons why it's so utterly shocking that for most of this war, a majority of fatalities have been women and children. It's still, something like 45%. And just as a comparison, if you look at the Syria network has good data on fatalities during the Syrian civil war, right? I mean, it's over 80% of civilian fatalities are adult men, right? And far over 80% of the total will be adult men. Iraq, according to Iraq body count, well over 80% of civilians killed are adult men. If you look at the total percentage, it'll be over 90% of people violently killed in the war, meaning killed like in combat or whatever, or killed by militaries, will be adult men. So this is extremely uncommon. In fact, has not happened since the Rwandan genocide. Such a high percentage of the overall kills being women and children. And the biggest reason for it is the Where's Daddy program. Because if you're killing families systematically, well, which they are, by bombing homes systematically full of families and with no soldiers in them other than one guy maybe, right? Because it's not like they've militarized the home and they're shooting rockets at it. No, it's just one guy's in there. You're going to kill women and children at an outrageous rate. If you're it's because they're systematically bombing homes. That's why they've reached this statistical anomaly. Because look, Assadist forces in Syria, they definitely killed civilians intentionally in Aleppo and elsewhere, but they killed, if you look overall, like Hezbollah and other militant groups, over 80% of the people they killed were adult men, right? And so it's just, nobody's ever done this where you're just going, okay, we're going to go from home to home, or we find someone we think has a Hamas affiliation, we're going to bomb them and kill the whole family, do this systematically. No military's ever done this. The only time you do it is if it's a target of really high value, and really morally speaking, it should make anyone uncomfortable, even in that case. But nobody's ever done this systematically. Yeah, this is the first time. Yeah.
The incredible thing is that the talking point we see, and I remember John Kirby, who was the spokesman for the White House National Security Council under Biden. They're all the supporters of Israel always say, "Oh, Israel's the most moral army in the world." And John Kirby at one point, he said, "Oh, Israel's taking all these steps to protect civilians. Even our own military wouldn't do that." So he's like smearing the American military to
Yeah, it was sweet.
defend these atrocities that
Yeah,
Israel.
and just to be clear, if you look at like violent fatalities, like the Brown University has a project, and I think they use Iraq body count data among other data, but they have a project called the Cost of War Institute. If you look at the number of civilians violently killed in Iraq across both wars, across the Second Iraq War and also the campaign against ISIS, about 200,000. And the large majority of those were not killed by the coalition. They were killed by, frankly, the insurgents, people they were fighting, or ISIS later. And then Afghanistan, the total number of civilians violently killed is going to be lower than what Israel's killed in Gaza. So there isn't a comparison. And look, Iraq was completely unjust. If you want me to vilify the Iraq War, I'd be happy to do that. It's kind of conventional wisdom at this point. And antiwar.com and you guys deserve credit for having opposed it when it wasn't conventional wisdom, right? But nevertheless, you didn't see anything like these rules of engagement. You didn't see anything like "Where's Daddy?" You didn't see free fire zones at a systematic level. You also didn't see like the government, like George W. Bush wasn't like calling Iraqis or Afghans human beasts or talking about destroying Iraq. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not you can be as anti-war as you want. You should be anti-war when it comes to Iraq. Any sane person should be, but it's not a serious comparison. Also, like, you have to look too that there were far more firefights in Iraq. The people that the United States was fighting, even ISIS, had much better munitions, right? So there's more opportunity for collateral damage when there are far more firefights. So. And if you look at the percentages killed, it's nothing compared to Gaza. I mean, Gaza is the highest percentage. It's something like, we can talk about my estimates, but I assess it's about 4 to 5% of the pre-war population has been killed. Again, there's nothing like this all century. Syria is 3% over nearly 14 years. Gaza's 4 to 5 in 22 months. I mean, it's really unbelievable. I was not pro-Israel, right? I mean, you wouldn't really expect it given my connection to the Arab world. But I actually would have been open to the idea that, Israel has a lot of human rights problems, but they can be exaggerated. And I mean, people like Chomsky and Finkelstein were basically correct all along, or they've completely lost their minds. It's one of the two. I mean, this is unbelievable what they're doing. And part of the reason which is, kind of like a, pretty liberal, boring establishment hack future, like think tank employee 2 years ago. Part of why I've been so radicalized is it's like, well, clearly like my theories of how foreign policy works aren't adequate if the West can be like sponsoring this. Right. And if our intellectuals are defending it, I mean, and it makes one want to look at history and say, what did I get wrong? Because I would not have seen this coming. Anything like this, it's unbelievable, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are, having that moment. And, we really see this in the US, especially like people that were always generally pro-Israel. I mean, it's become too, what's happening in Gaza. It's just too much to kind of ignore or just accept and say, that's just part of our foreign policy. We support Israel. Well, when you see the images of starvation and all these atrocities.
Yeah.
So I want to get more into the genocide. But first, actually, I want to touch on the numbers, because when you're talking about, 45%, 50% of women and children killed, you are citing the Gaza Health Ministry data, which I believe now is around 62,000 they're saying are killed.
Something like that. Yeah,
so
over 60,000, yeah.
If you could just tell me quick why you trust those numbers and what you think the actual violent death toll.
Yeah, I mean, not only do I trust numbers, I'll just say this, like having said this extensively, the numbers are correct. There might be errors, a few errors, but not at a high scale. Like I've looked at this backwards and forwards. These are reliable. And now the serious viewer is going to ask, so why do you say that? Well, there are a number of reasons. The first reason is historical accuracy. This doesn't prove, of course, that they're accurate this time around, but it should give us a kind of a priori assumption that they will be until we look at the other data, right? Because if you look at Operation Cast Lead and Protective Edge, for example, the two big Israeli wars in Gaza before October 7th, recent ones, the number of fatalities and the demographic profile of fatalities the Ministry of Health reports is essentially the same as B'Tselem, the United Nations, and Human Rights Watch, and other groups that did estimates for one or both conflicts. So, right historically is a big reason. The other reason, well, there are many reasons. The other biggest reason is that the Ministry of Health is extremely transparent. Contrary to the propaganda about, oh, they're a Hamas propaganda outfit, they publish for every name, virtually every, and at this point it's over 99% have all these data. They publish name, full Arabic name. So there's 4 names, like a name of the father, grandfather, and family name, and of course the person's name. They have this for basically everybody on their list of the 62,000 or however, whatever the precise number is right now. They publish age, sex. You know, it's Gaza, so we have just men and women, no other categories, but men and women for each person. And they also published Loon algorithm compliant Israel issued ID numbers. So these are like, if the Loon algorithm is basically what your credit card conforms to, and Israel gives these IDs with Loon algorithm compliant numbers to Palestinians in Gaza. And for each of the fatalities, or virtually all of them, the Gaza Ministry of Health provides them. So there's extensive information on each person, and you can check that in open sources. I've done this in a number of cases, and you find that, some people don't have social media, but you find in a very large number of them, Air Wars has done these checks that they are real deaths, the families eulogizing the person, and so on. And then the other thing,
you can read Arabic, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a big help for this kind of
Yeah,
research.
yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons I felt like I needed to get involved in this. Like, and it was only like to read Arabic. It was like, what the fuck is going on? Like, how are we condoning this? Is insane. And the one thing I was open to is there some mitigating excuse? Like the human shields thing is as bad as their propaganda says. I didn't think that was true, but I thought maybe, who knows? But when I realized that, oh no, they're just bombing homes systematically and killing whole families to kill like a guy who was an ex-militant, a low-level militant, or a civilian who says views they don't like, or a civilian member of the government. Like, no, they're just murdering people. But in terms of other, I'll give you a couple other reasons. I'll be concise. Two other reasons that I think are important. There are others, but we'll talk about these two really quick. So the Israelis and the Americans, according to what range of public reporting, secretly, not the Americans are open about it, but the Israeli and the American governments secretly regard, in terms of Israel, secretly regard these data as reliable, right? Vice News reported the IDF regards it as reliable. The Economist reported that the IDF did a study on them and found that they're real people. So the Western governments trust this, whatever propaganda they may say publicly. And then finally, they've contradicted Hamas's propaganda. So here's an example. Hamas maintained for many, many months. Ministry of Health initially maintained this when it was pretty close to true. Like in October 2023, something like 70% or close of fatalities were in this insane, it was all where's daddy. And like something like 70% of fatalities, or a little lower, were women, children, and elderly. But Hamas has maintained 70% for months and months and months, long after it was true, right? So it was around 52%, of fatalities were women and children, and Hamas's government media office would say 70%. And the Ministry of Health at one point actually publicly said, no, this is incorrect. So they didn't say Hamas is wrong, but they implicitly contradicted them. They said in an interview with a Sky News journalist that no, 70% is not true, right? So, the fact that they're willing to contradict their own government's propaganda is pretty remarkable, and I think more reason to trust them. So they're telling the truth about the estimate. In fact, though, it is undercounted, as I can get into if you wish.
Yeah. So what was that study that Michael Spaggett, who you've worked with, he did recently? I know Haaretz had coverage of it, and I know there was a similar one published in the Lancet. I forget who did the study, but basically that found, based on those numbers, roughly the violent death toll at this point, and when I say violent, I mean killed by airstrikes or gunfire, shelling, whatever, is probably around 100,000.
Yeah, exactly. So, what Spagat did, I'll talk about Spagat's work first, and I'll talk about the excellent Lancet article that you referred to, because there's also a bad Lancet article that some people on our
Yeah.
side are citing and is definitely wrong. It's overestimating deaths, but we'll talk about the 100,000 figure, which I think is right. So Mike Spagat, along with the Palestinian, a famous Palestinian pollster, Khalil Shikaki, and other scholars, commissioned a poll of Gazans, of 10,000 Gazans since 2,000 households, so a remarkably large sample size during the war, during the genocide, I should say. And, they found that, according to these data, violent fatalities in Gaza were about 40% underestimated by the Ministry of Health through January of 2025. And this is a remarkable finding because another analysis by Zaina Jamaluddin and other scholars in the Lancet, which was based on capture-recapture analysis, which, without getting into the technical aspects of it, they're using multiple sources, right? So they looked at, one thing they looked at is what I looked at, open sources. So basically, like families writing on Facebook, I've lost my child here, and they have a picture of their child and they say, this is what happened and God bless her and we're miserable, right? Or I lost my husband, or I lost my, so they found, using various sources and also hospital records, about a 40% undercount too. So I find it interesting that the two most credible studies that both engage in original research, right? So we're not talking about just analyzing something the Ministry of Health published, but original research found about a 40% undercount by the Ministry of Health. And this makes sense, by the way, that it would be undercounted. The reason it makes sense is because if you look at the Ministry of Health's methods, they're only counting deaths that where either one, they've seen a corpse, so like an employee of the Ministry of Health has seen a body, or two, the family has reported the death and they've completed a judicial process. So, for example, and this relates to my work, the Ministry of Health some months ago removed thousands of fatalities, a few thousand fatalities, from its list. And the people who haven't made one cogent point throughout the war thought that they had finally found one, like people like Eisenberg or Andrew Fox or John Spencer, because they're removing thousands of names, right? Why would they do that? Does it mean that they're not reliable and so on? And I actually went through these, and I found that of the children, I didn't go through all of them, but I went through all the children that had been removed in a couple iterations, which is over 1,000
names.
Yeah, along with my team in Gaza, who deserve far more credit than I do. But we conclude the large majority of these were real deaths, and that the Ministry of Health has removed them because they just don't conform to their criteria. They're just being real sticklers about, we need to have seen a body, or you need to have a judicial certificate of death. And yeah, because again, we'd go over and over again on Facebook, we'd see a horrible picture of someone who was killed, and it was a removed name, right? A child who had been removed from the list. So the fact that they removed thousands of names from their list that are real fatalities points to their conservatism too. I mean, to me, it's very difficult to square the argument of inflation with removing real fatalities. Rather, I think that they said, "Oh, these don't conform to our criteria," and they mass removed them. And some of them, there were some that were alive, and so it was like 1%, I think, that I confirmed were alive, and we confirmed, my team rather, were alive and or injured, right? So there were mistakes or missing. There was more missing, I think a couple percent. So I think there were more mistakes in this bunch that they removed because I don't think it hadn't conformed to their criteria. And by the way, I talked to an official at the Ministry of Health recently, just on WhatsApp, and he confirmed my hypothesis was correct, that they removed them because it didn't conform to their criteria, not because that they think that they're fake deaths or whatever. You may remember when this happened, everyone was saying, "Oh, fake deaths,"
And even I'll link to your study on that because I think it's important. But even if they're inflating the numbers, why would they remove thousands of names?
Right. Also real deaths. I mean, you could theoretically say they're inflating. And they want to remove the ones that they're going to get caught on, or something like that. I don't know. But like, again, I saw with one of the children who was killed and whose name they removed, 10-year-old girl named Sarah. I saw the bullet I found through social media and family postings. I saw the bullet that was shot into her head by an Israeli drone. Right. I saw her injury. I didn't share, by the way. I posted all of our data to the AOAV article because I believe in transparency as a researcher. So, and of course, there's just been no response to this piece from Fox and Eisenberg, who this was their main exhibit of the Ministry of Health data is fake. And, I found, hey, the large majority of these are real deaths. And I posted all of our findings with links to social media. And, everyone has Google Translate, so you can check this. Anyone can check these. And it wouldn't be difficult to do. Yet, no response. In fact, they still say it discredits them because it shows they made it's not even a mistake. They're just being taxonomically consistent, right? Yeah. Which is like, we have certain standards for kind of death. These may be real deaths, but they haven't met them yet. And they will meet them because people are going to go through the process.
So I follow, because I write like a daily kind of update on the situation in Gaza 5 days a week for antiwar.com. And I always look at the health ministry's numbers. And I know once in a while they'll say, oh, we added, we confirmed 200 other deaths, that we were in the process of confirming, and they added that to the death toll. So it's clear that it's a very meticulous process that they undertake. And as I understand, these are doctors who run the health ministry, correct?
Yeah. Look, they're serious people. I don't want to speak too much for them. I've spoken to one of the officials who does a lot of the statistical work. And yeah, they're serious people, and they're basically doing statistical work. They're not propagandizing. The group that propagandizes is the government media office. But again, the Ministry of Health literally contradicted their estimate. As I said, they said no, it's actually much lower than the 70%. Now they didn't say it like in a provocative way.
I actually kind of remember when that happened. Yeah,
they didn't say it in a provocative way, a confrontational way. But they were asked by a journalist, "Hey, this number keeps being thrown around. Is it right?" And they said no. Yeah. Because people were like, wait, that's inconsistent, because there was an inconsistency what the Ministry of Health was saying and the government media office was saying. So yeah, I mean, no, they're reliable. They're a serious group.
So based on your research, you believe 4 to 5% of the population has been killed?
Yeah, I think about 100,000 people in terms of the pre-war population have been killed. Let me make a one point though about deaths. So the big problem that we focus on is deflation of the death toll. People who say it's the Ministry of Health is overcounting, or that it's comprehensive, which it isn't, right? They're undercounting. But there also are folks who, based on historical estimates, right? Historical estimates of like average ratios of violent to natural deaths. These folks have said, oh, there must be hundreds of thousands killed, right? So, because the idea is if you have 90 or 100,000 violent deaths, you're surely going to have 200, 300, 400,000 indirect deaths. There's actually a letter in the Lancet, not to be confused with the study I just cited, but there was a letter in the Lancet in 2024, which predicted far more deaths than had been reported at the time because of an assumption that they're going to be several times the number of natural deaths. But look, all of my open source research shows that natural deaths are at a very low level from what we'd expect.
You mean like indirect deaths?
Yeah, exactly.
Bombing campaign, yeah.
Exactly. No, indirect deaths, like you get sick because you're in a tent, or you don't have access to medication and so on. It's been remarkably low. And that's changing now, which we can talk about with the starvation. But let's say until the ceasefire, remarkably low. And I think the reason was that the UN system was so efficient. It was, I feel like by calling the UN so much, I'm committing some heresy against libertarians. But I don't know if everyone's a libertarian listening, but regardless, it's just a fact. The UN system was remarkably efficient. Gaza had, since 2007, been under blockade, and there were 400. They knew how to distribute aid to people, right? This was even by regional standards, was a completely impoverished area. But, and this is something the Israel people bring up, the pro-Israel people bring up, it actually wasn't that bad in terms of public health standards. Pretty good, even. Like life expectancy was in the 70s, higher than Egypt, right? Even though Gaza is way poorer than Egypt, way higher unemployment because of the blockade. Because of all the aid, and the really efficient aid system, people got food, people got medicine, and free healthcare through UNRWA too. So this system, insofar as it was able to function the first couple of years of the war, was able to prevent a huge number of deaths, and it's really one of the reasons why natural deaths are going to be, at least for the first couple of years, so low. But sadly, the prolonging of the war and the replacement of the UN system with the kind of evangelical Christian Zionist Gaza, so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation or Fund, whatever it's called, Fund would be more apt. Sadly, this is changing this year dramatically. It's not just the people who've starved to death. It's going to be far more than that, sadly, because even people who don't starve to death are going to be much more likely to die of diseases, right? Because of malnourishment. So, and I'm sad to say, I've also confirmed by my conversations with the Ministry of Health people who, by the way, also confirmed natural deaths are much lower than people have reported, right? Than people have speculated. Again, a strange thing to say if you're trying to inflate. Why would you say, oh no, they're much lower than way lower than what these people are saying, like hundreds of thousands? No, way lower. Strange way to inflate, but it's way up this year. And it's not what they're reporting publicly. First of all, they're undercounting starvation deaths too.
Well, when they say it, it's what hospitals recorded.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They're undercounting starvation deaths too. Because some people aren't in hospitals or they haven't gotten a judicial certificate yet. So that's one thing. But the more important thing is that you're going to have thousands and thousands of people, optimistically, sadly. There would be in the thousands. It's very optimistic, probably higher, but tens of thousands, but you're gonna have thousands and thousands of people die of diseases that would not have died in 2024 from the same diseases because they weren't malnourished. So this is all a horror right now. And it's really amazing what the UN system did. I mean, these people last year were living in tents, right? Overwhelming majority were living in tents. But I guess if you just are really efficient at distributing food, medicine, and vaccinations to people, as the UN system was, even with these horrific sanitation, these unhygienic living conditions, you can keep folks alive. But sadly, this is changing this year for no reason. There was no reason to do this. But
yeah.
But and also here's another thing. Israel, even though Israel doesn't care about the Palestinians, they should be really grateful for the UN. And here's why. If there were if you didn't have this remarkable aid system in Gaza, if there were a more typical ratio of natural to violent deaths, you'd have had like 400,000 people killed. And you'd actually have a situation where nobody could dispute this was genocide, right? If they had killed more than 1 out of 6 of the people in 22 months. I mean, and it would be like that. It would be like that if you didn't have this remarkable aid system. Right?
I think that's part of the strategy why they wanted to destroy UNRWA in Gaza. I think that's probably why part of the reason was because they were good at keeping the Palestinians fed and alive. When we were talking about earlier, you said that all these things that they claim are, they cite security justifications for are really just excuses to kill civilians. Right. I think that is the case with this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, as the whistleblower, Tony Aguilar, former U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, Green Beret, has said that, they're designed. One thing he said that stood out to me, he says the media coverage, they say that the GHF sites have turned into death traps. He says, no, they were designed to be death traps, designed to send people through these areas that are open fire kill zones, essentially. And the fact that some of the things he said in the interviews, like the fact that they're using live ammunition for crowd control.
Yeah, there have been people, doctors, Palestinians, talk about tanks, and I don't know, not the GHF using tanks, but in terms of people who are seeking aid, unarmed civilians, the Israelis have used tanks and artillery as forms of
and they've even admitted that,
unbelievably. Yeah, I mean, the Haaretz, they talked about it, and I have to say, a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, who's in Gaza right now, and hopefully we'll be getting out soon. I think we've managed to pull that off, honestly, which is really cool if it happens. but knock on wood. But Hiba, a friend of mine she wrote an article recently for Dropset where she talked about something which she told me many months ago, and I was told I was lying, of course, which I wasn't, where her 15-year-old unarmed cousin was shot in the head by the IDF while he was seeking 14-year-old actually 14-year-old unarmed cousin was shot in the head while he was seeking aid. Of course, family felt horrific that they allowed him to. This is early on in the so-called GHF process. So no, she's not lying. One of my research team for AOAV had a relative who I don't want to be too specific. I just won't mention that because I'm not entirely sure I remember all the details of it. But Hiba and another person I'll say that I know personally have had relatives shot intentionally by the IDF while seeking aid, and they're obviously like Hiba's family is obviously by our standards they'd be conservative, but they're quite liberal for Gaza. Like they sent her to a co-ed school, like with some boys and girls who were in high school together. They're not Hamas, right? And yet they shot her 14-year-old cousin in the head. So no, it's as you say, you can always find an excuse. This is crowd control. There's always an excuse, but at some point you have to just say no. This looks like intentionally killing civilians.
Yeah,
why is the rate higher than any other war of the whole century in terms of the percentage of the population killed? Why is the percentage of women and children killed so much higher than everywhere else? Like you have to just say at some point, no, I don't buy this. And also I have to say a lot of people, and this frustrates me because I thought, again, if I go into my kind of narrative, I really thought that the West was superior in terms of human rights, in terms of that even had it extended to foreign policy and adherence to laws of war and so forth. And I mean, the excuses people have, and intellectuals too, have made for this is unbelievable. I mean, imagine if the Chinese invaded Taiwan and they were using tanks and artillery, and there were like, hundreds or many dozens of Taiwanese who'd spoken to the media and said, yeah, they just kill us at these aid sites. There's like massacres every day. First of all, everyone would call it murder. Nobody would have any doubt, right? There wouldn't be any discourse about whether this is murder or not, or that they did Where's Daddy. There'd be no discourse of whether that's intentional killing or not. And we'd probably threaten, we'd call them Hitler and so on. So it's, but yet if it's a friendly state, we don't care. And I find that very disappointing.
Support it and fund it. Yeah. And I mean, again, with the aid massacres, a number that you mentioned, now the death toll is almost 2,000. It's like 1,800 something.
Yeah.
Palestinians who have been killed going out to get food since the end of May. And as I understand it, that's mostly people killed near GHF sites, but also people trying to reach UN aid trucks. Yeah. And since they've let a few more trucks in, we've seen that kind of death toll rising. And then the number of injured is like 14,000. And I remember you mentioned when the casualties were like 10,000, just based on the rough number of a 2 million population of 2 million. That means 1 in 200 people in Gaza.
Have been injured or killed. Not killed, but yes, injured or some people misunderstood what I meant by casualty. I actually specified injured, but some people misunderstood nevertheless. But no, killed or injured seeking aid. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's that's like what you would expect from like a war that had gone on for a year, like a whole country in the war zone, not like this alleged aid fund,
And then this goes on, so I saw today Mike Huckabee did an interview with the Times of Israel.
Yeah.
It was kind of amazing because the interviewer, I think it was David Horowitz, who, an Israeli, seems pretty pro, Israel and everything. He was like trying to get Huckabee to say one bad thing about Israel's conduct in Gaza, and he couldn't. And at one point he said, don't you think they should use non-lethal forms of crowd control? And Huckabee said, what do you expect them to do? Call the Girl Scouts in or something like that? Like, this is evil, what's happening.
It really is. Yeah.
This really is a different level. And as someone who for many years has been very critical of U.S. foreign policy and our wars and interventions, I mean, this is like just a completely different level of evil.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's important to point that out because not to whitewash the United States and, completely unjust war. And look, with Iraq, all of the 200,000 civilians who were violently killed, right? All of them are on the U.S. for starting the war. So even the ones killed by ISIS or Hezbollah or whatever, they're all in the U.S. for starting an unjust war. So it isn't that we don't have responsibility for this, but like if you look at the conduct of the military and the policy that points to, no, there's the only war you could compare this to recently is Vietnam. Even that I think is questionable. Although obviously the U.S. killed a lot more people. There's went on for many years, much larger theater of war, much stronger armaments the other side. Like if you look, I'm talking about like the rules of engagement though. I think that this is
no, it's like I mean, I have friends who were in the military who were in Iraq, Afghanistan, and we work with people because the most valuable kind of anti-war activists I think are veterans. Yeah. And I've heard stories of them taking great lengths to avoid putting themselves in danger to avoid civilian casualties. And overall, the war was a crime, was unjust. The war in Iraq. We're talking about
like the motive is different too. I think Iraq, I think Israel's a part of it, why we did it, but I think the biggest motive was like kind of a neocolonialism. It was sort of like we wanted to make Iraq into like a westernized pro-America state, and we thought that would be good for our security, and we need to do something big after 9/11 to address the long-term issue of Islamic extremism. I think that was the logic. I don't believe that these people were afraid of being attacked, even if they believe the WMD thing. I always thought was a silly debate because whether they believed it or not, because obviously they didn't have it, but because even if they believed they had WMD, like of course Iraq isn't a threat, even if they have it. Like, North Korea isn't a threat to the United States right now, right? It's a threat to its people. It's a threat to South Korea potentially, but it's not a threat to the United States. So they didn't believe it was defensive. But again, like a neo-colonial motive, which I think was there for sure, is not the same as let's try to destroy Gaza. And again, that's the statement over and over again from the officials. So it's funny how people on our side of this issue are called so radical when we're like literally quoting ministers and generals and public opinion in Israel. I mean, I don't think I'd have to look at the polls, but I don't think after 9/11, most Americans would have said there's no innocence in Afghanistan. I don't think most Americans would have said that. Most Israelis do. Right?
Yeah. I remember, growing up, because I was a young kid when 9/11 happened. I lived on Long Island, a suburb of New York, and I knew people who died. And, I heard some pretty heinous things from people over the years. But what you see, nobody was ever so public about it that we see.
No, there was definitely a proportion of the public. I bet you it was significant. Like if that were ever, it should have been polled. But I bet you a good chunk of the right had genocidal views. But if you look at the president Bush, who again, war criminal, did this completely unjust war in Iraq. I mean, he didn't. Colin Powell, Rumsfeld, Cheney. These people were not talking about human beasts, and we need to like remove the Iraqis to like turn this into the Riviera. It was like they wanted to transform the society because they thought it would be in our interests. And they probably thought in the back of their head, hey, it'll be better for them too. And they were so arrogant, I think, by like recent American military successes in the first Gulf War and in Yugoslavia and in Kosovo, that I think they thought that there would be relatively low casualty affair, and then hey, we're the West, we're going to make this country better. And I think they actually probably believed their own propaganda to some extent, but they definitely didn't believe that about liberators and so on. But they definitely didn't believe that it was defense. They didn't believe that was a lie.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of hubris there. But so to wrap this up, I just want to close with. I mean, this is a genocide that's happening in Gaza. I think the fact that you even have people. This stuff with the starvation, saying, "Oh, these kids are all have pre-medical, pre-existing medical conditions, so it's no big deal."
It's disturbing. It's like very disturbing.
Yeah, it's monstrous on kind of a new level, and I think it's very disturbing that this is like mainstream discourse. That conversations are even happening.
Right. It's a shock to my worldview because I wouldn't have thought this level of depravity, which is. Obviously, in any famine, when you're talking about the first several hundred deaths by starvation, by physical starvation, you're going to have a large overrepresentation of the very vulnerable. So we're talking about the poor, the very poor, people who were like kind of on the fringe socially. I've heard about these kind of folks. Like there's a woman who, again, my friend here was really great. I'm thinking about her a lot with respect to Gaza. She's there right now. There's a lady in her neighborhood who she and her family have helped, but she was vulnerable to starvation because a lot of families died and has a child with special needs. So like the very poor, people with pre-existing conditions, very young. These are the people vulnerable to starvation. And no, but the Israeli, it's absurd though, because like if you look at the data in Gaza in 2022, I actually talked to the minister, got a document for this Ministry of Health. They actually didn't record a single death by starvation in 2022. So like there's zero, and yet there's hundreds now. There are tons of people with pre-existing conditions in 2022, right?
Yeah.
In fact, many of these same kids, they weren't emaciated. Like you know, you can have cerebral palsy and live a really productive life. Like one of my best friends from college, she was in a wheelchair, but she was otherwise like really smart. You know, we debated politics and so on all the time. We got into fights, like college kid stuff. So we were like just like regular friend, you know.
I saw
and this is not. She didn't just naturally starve to death. Like that's not what happens. They're starving to death because of this policy, and the people who starve more quickly, right, are people like this. So
I saw the State of Israel's official X account tweeted out a picture of a guy who was dead, you know, starved to death, and it said fake news on it, and it said, oh, 41-year-old so-and-so was reported that he starved to death, but he really had diabetes and he wasn't being treated for it, and that's what killed him. And it's just like, what? How is that? This is your propaganda? Like,
also there have been people. I mean, I found this so distasteful. It's important to do, but it's so distasteful, and it's basically what. I mean, if you were to drop, what would a country that's trying to sound like the good guys while committing a genocide say? And it's like stuff like this. Like, yeah, the emaciated child who's like starving to death because we blocked all food imports for 2.5 months and then like set up this fake aid organization to replace this incredibly effective one. Yeah, that doesn't count because he has cerebral palsy and they starve too easily. Or I think maybe are they trying to say like people just naturally starve to death who have cerebral palsy? I mean,
yeah, that's kind of what some people seem to imply.
Again, like, yeah, like meet someone who has cerebral palsy. Like they can live good lives, you know. But
so, yeah, I think I want to wrap up there. I wanted to conclude just with, you know, as we were talking, I really think this is how, like, we're seeing how a modern country in 2025, a so-called first world nation, would do a genocide. Like there would be all this plausible deniability built on top of what is intentionally killing and destroying a civilian population. I mean,
but you also have tons of statements to the contrary, especially in the Hebrew language. I mean, you have on, you know, just today, the wife of the former Israeli chief of staff who served, in quotes, from October 2023 to 2025, said the day of October 7th, her husband told her, "We'll destroy Gaza. We're going to destroy Gaza." You know, Smotrich, who people say, "Oh, he's important." Well, he's in the security cabinet, meaning he makes there's no war cabinet anymore, so he makes decisions about the war, right? Because he's in the security cabinet. His statements are, "We are destroying Gaza." He doesn't say, "I wish we were." Fuck Netanyahu, because we aren't. He's saying we are destroying Gaza. So the genocidal so you have on the one hand this Hezbollah narrative where they're trying to like, use the discourse of the West, but they're also in private and in public with their own society. They're just genocidal statement. I mean, some of them really do sound like Nazis. I mean, I know that's inflammatory, and I'm not just saying that to hurt anyone's feelings or anything like that. And again, this is not as extreme of a case of genocide as the Nazi Holocaust. Just not isn't, because there's not a policy of trying to kill every last person in Gaza, right? It's more like the Rohingya genocide or Bosnia. But you know, some of the rhetoric does remind of like of Nazi outbursts. I mean, there was
Smotrich actually said at one point,
yeah, like, the world just to starve to death. No, he said it would be just to starve to death 2 million Gazans, but the world won't let us.
Yeah,
and then there was another quote. I'll try to pull this up because I actually don't have it. Oh yeah, I'm going to just read this really quick. Gaza is destroyed and disintegrated, uninhabitable, and it will remain that way. This is an animal society. Very soon we will erase their smile again. This is during the ceasefire, where they're the ceasefire ended, so people were happy. The war ended briefly. We will erase their smile again and replace it with cries of distress and the whimpering of Gazans who are left with nothing. I mean, again, this sounds like Nazis, frankly.
Yeah.
You know, for the most part in history, people aren't. Nazis are an exception to this, but for the most part in history, leadership who committing genocide are not this open about it, and they're on the more extreme end. I think actually too, like if you look at, I did mention that the genocide is less extreme than the Nazi Holocaust. It definitely is. But you have to understand too, they're under constraints. The Nazis were masters of continental Europe after the fall of France, right? And the Holocaust doesn't begin until 1941, so they're masters of continental Europe by then. There's no constraints really what they can do to people in Hungary or Germany or Poland. And the Israelis have a lot of constraints, and they've still committed this genocide, right? Imagine they didn't have the constraints. I mean, I think the society is deeply radical, and there's poll after poll to support this. So. The only positive is I don't think that they can cover up public opinion in their country. I don't think they can cover up the fact that the percentage of people killed is the highest in the century in 22 months. That this looks like a genocide. Like in terms of the numbers, the percentage of people killed, it looks much more like a genocide than a war. I don't the intent, the stated policies of the leaders to kick them out, send them to Sudan or whatever. I don't think they can cover this up, even with mainstream. And the Israel lobby is extremely powerful. But maybe I'm wrong, and I don't like people saying, oh, history will judge, because we don't know what history is going to say, right? Because power matters too. It isn't just truth and justice. Power matters a ton. But I just think the conduct is so egregious that in free societies like ours, no matter what people in power are saying, you just cannot cover this up forever. We'll see, but that's my prediction and my hope. And by the way, my coping mechanism, because if I knew the John Spencer stuff would carry the day, like those lies, I would basically go crazy, because I'd be like, okay, we're basically living in Maoist China, I guess. Right?
Yeah. Well, to close, I wanted to have you on, Matthew, because you are a historian, someone who's studied all these different conflicts, and you look at the numbers, and you're not just some ideologically non-interventionist anti-war guy like me. So I think your perspective has a lot of value, and I think it is the perspective that is going to win the day, hopefully. And this is how this era in history will be remembered. I think just because of the fact that the support for Israel is crumbling in the U.S. So they're not going to be able to control this narrative for much longer over the next few decades. I mean, in the U.S. So
let's hope so, because honestly, I'm going to go crazy if there's the issue of justice, of course, but I will actually, in a crudely self-interested way, I think I will go nuts at some level if they manage to cover this up. I mean,
I'll tell you,
so incredible.
One of the reasons why I started writing for antiwar.com is because I was outraged over the U.S. supporting the Saudi war in Yemen. Involved starvation campaign, and the U.S. Navy was actually enforcing the blockade at one point.
Right, that's true. The blockade, which led to, I think 90,000 children starved to death.
Yeah, nobody really knows the real numbers, but I don't think we have a real grip on the numbers there. And the bombing was, civilian infrastructure, targeted children. A school bus was blown
Although
up.
I'll say, even in the case of the air war in Yemen, you didn't have anything like this percentage. Now, if you add in the starvation, of course, that's mostly children. But if you look at just the people killed by the Saudi military, the percentage of women and children is much smaller than Israel.
If you look at the U.S., this is kind of, I don't want to go too far off topic.
Yeah, sure.
But if you look at Trump's bombing campaign in Yemen just
a
month and a half,
was crazy.
He massacred civilians.
He did. No,
that was
bad.
So what I'm trying to say is I understand, I know what it's like to feel crazy, because that's again why I started writing, because I was like, how can we be supporting this? And nobody cares. Nobody's even aware of it. At least with this, the world does seem to be on our side. And I think, like I said, I think history is going to remember this properly. And
right. But, although there still are, and then I'll let you go, Dave, because you've been a great interviewer. I don't want to detain you with my own grievances, but it does drive me mad that take the starvation, right? So from at the beginning of the war, and even into this year when they were blocking aid, they said this is about pressuring the civilian population to overthrow Hamas or release the hostages or whatever. They said this explicitly. And then all of a sudden, no, it was never about attacking civilians. So, and then people believe it. It's no, they literally said this. It's you rarely get a confession like this, so explicit, but they literally confess, our motive is an attack on civilians. And, now people just are oh no, it's the UN or Hamas stealing the aid. No, they literally said what the motive was, guys. And you're not reading it because you're so convinced Western man good. You're just so convinced of that as your epistemology, but...
and I think both Smotrich and Ben-Gvir said at one point, we're not going to let a grain of wheat into Gaza. They're very open about what they were doing. But anyway, to wrap things up, where can people find your work? I know your handle on Twitter is History Speaks, right?
Yeah, History Speaks on Twitter. History Speaks on, and then on my Twitter page, you can find YouTube and Substack content. In the future, I'd like to create more content in history. But right now, I feel like I have friends in Gaza. I think I have a special analytical set of skills for this, and I'm going to continue to talk about the genocide. But in the future, hopefully, we'll have content of a more historical interest. But right now, I got to focus on this genocide. So
Yeah, that's how we feel too. Like
yeah,
because a lot of times we cover things that people don't really pay much attention to, but at this point, it's like the focus
yeah.
needs to be on Gaza right now. But anyway, and I'm going to try to remember to link to your studies in the description so people can go check them out.
Yeah. Again, refuting the Israel claim of a 1-to-1 ratio. One of the studies, the other one, which I did with my team in Gaza, showing that they had removed. Actually, they're removing real fatalities from the list. That's how careful and conservative they are. We proved that through open sources and other work. So thank you guys.
All right, Matthew. Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it.